Hi, good morning. My name's Emma Cruikshank. We're just obviously going to wait for a few more people to join the session. And I'm joined by Tom. So if you just give us a sort of minute or so while we just get everyone to join. Okay, thank you. Okay, I think if it's okay with everybody, I think we'll probably look to make a start. So I'd like to welcome you all today to the webinar on What Are My Child's Rights, which is hosted by Thomas Pocklington Trust. I'm Emma Cruikshank and I'm the head of the Children, Young People and Families Service for Thomas Pocklington Trust. And we're really pleased to welcome Tom Quilter, who's the Senior Development Worker for the Council for Disabled Children. Tom's got a great presentation to go through for you today, which will hopefully help you understand your child's rights, and we'll cover some key themes such as helping you understand what your child's legal rights with regards to education are, and how you can challenge if you think your child is not getting access to the education, support and services that they're entitled to. We've obviously, we're really interested if we get some questions from you, and I'm sure everyone's going to have a load of questions that they're going to want to ask. So I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A section. So if you've got any questions, if you can please put them in there. And also, if you'd like a copy of the slides, please do let us know. You can drop us an email or you can put it in the Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tom for today's session. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Emma. Nice to sort of meet everyone in the new sort of world of meeting people over Zoom. My name's Tom Quilter, as Emma mentioned, and I'm the Senior Development Officer within the Information Advice and Support Service Network for the Council for Disabled Children, which is part of the National Children's Bureau. I'm just going to quickly start sharing my screen so I can walk through some of the slides. So first of all, a bit about myself and the IASSM. So if you haven't heard of the National Children's Bureau, they are the umbrella organisation that sort of works and sort of aims to pull together the children's sector, putting together all the different organisations involved in supporting children and young people to meet their potential. And the Council for Disabled Children are part of the National Children's Bureau, and their role is to be the umbrella body for the disabled children's sector, so pulling together all the different professionals, practitioners and policymakers that work with children and young people with disabilities in order to ensure that children and young people with disabilities, with special educational needs and disabilities, have access to the support and services that they need to be able to meet their their sort of outcomes and their potential. So myself, I am the Senior Development Officer within the Information Advice and Support Services Network, and I'm going to apologise in advance for the amount of acronyms and different bits and pieces, but as you all know, unfortunately that's the world that we live in. The Information Advice and Support Services Network, we bring together and work with the network of 152 special educational needs and disability information, advice and support services all around the country. So there's a SENDIAS service in every local authority. The SENDIAS services are a legal requirement as part of the Children and Families Act 2014, which sort of required every local authority to make sure that children and young people with SEND and their families have access to an impartial information, advice and support service to ensure that they knew, understood and had all the rights and support that they were entitled to. So the IASSM, so that's my service, we work with all those services up and down the country to make sure they have the right resources and training to be able to provide the impartial information, advice and support to the children, young people and families in their area. We also sort of work with them to understand the challenges and successes of working in this way within their local area. And we also make sure that the Department for Education and policy makers understand the work that they're doing, the challenges that they're coming up against, and just the general landscape of support and services across the country, and sort of the main issues that are being brought to services, and any sort of times where services, children, young people and families are challenging the decisions made by the local authorities and the tribunal processes, and trying to sort of reduce the need for those challenges by making sure that everybody understands the rights and responsibilities of the local authority and services right from the start. So at the IASSM, within my role, we don't provide direct support to children and young people and families. We provide support and services to the services that provide direct support to children and young people and their families. So today I'm going to be talking a bit about children and young people's right to education and to support and services in general. But the people who will be able to support you directly, if you are in a situation where you would like to understand a bit more about your rights or your child or young person's rights, the best people to talk to will be your local IAS service, and I'll be able to direct you to how to find your local IAS service later on in the presentation, as well as sort of looking a bit about the other information, advice and support organisations that are out there that work nationally, some of which you might have heard of. Hopefully you've heard of most of the organisations I'm going to be talking about today, because they are the organisations that are there, that are funded to make sure that children and young people have access, and their families have access to the right information, advice and support to be able to access the support and services that they are entitled to and that they have a right to. And any that you haven't heard of, hopefully we can fill you in a bit today. And also it'd be good to sort of know from a sort of a national perspective why people may not have heard of these services, because it's important to try and get the information out there to ensure that everybody can access these services as we go. So that's a very quick overview of the Council for Disabled Children and the National Children's Bureau. Most of our roles and most of our funding comes from the Department for Education, in order to sort of make sure that services have the sort of right sort of support and training and resources and tools and policy documents and those things to be able to do their role. And it all comes from the Children and Families Act, which places that statutory responsibility on local authorities to provide it. So as mentioned, the Information, Advice and Support Service works under Section 32 of the Children and Families Act, which states that a local authority in England must arrange for children and young people for whom it is responsible, and the parents of children for whom it is responsible, to be provided with advice and information about matters relating to the special educational needs of the children and young people concerned. And so this is all part of the push within the Children and Families Act to make support and services more transparent, to get professionals and children, young people and families on the same page, to be working together to sort of improve relationships between children, young people, families and professionals, in order to provide better services and better outcomes for children, young people with special educational needs and disabilities. So it is the local authority's responsibility to make sure that children and young people have and their families have access to the information, advice and support around the services that they are entitled to. It also, Section 32 also makes sort of puts the responsibility on the local authority to ensure that everybody is aware of that service as well. So you know, when Ofsted is coming in, they will be looking at not only does the local authority have an information, advice and support service that parents and children, young people can access to make sure that they are that they understand everything they need to around what they are entitled to and what services and support they should be getting, but also that the local authority is doing its best to publicise that service to make sure that, you know, children, young people and their families feel that there is services that they need to be able to meet their outcomes and their potential, that they know where to go to get the right impartial information, advice and support. There is a video which I do feel is cheating a little bit when doing webinars, but it's probably quite a handy one to watch to give a little bit of an overview of what an information advice and support service does, because obviously this was sort of done with the whole team and all of those sorts of bits and pieces. So I thought it would be worth playing it. So hopefully it's just a few minutes long, but it will give you a bit of an overview about information advice and support services, what they do, how to access them, and it probably explains it better than I can over this webinar. So apologies for teasing a bit, but let's give it a go. If it works, of course.
Sorry, I think we're having a little bit of a technical problem with some of the sound on the video.
Sorry, Emma, is that the sound's not coming through, is it?
Yeah, no, so really sorry, because obviously there's yeah, we're not able to hear the video, sorry.
Oh, that's a shame. Okay, well that's no worries. It was just a bit of an overview. I can send that out in the resources. The video has got sound and has got a voiceover, so it should be able to be, which is designed to be as accessible as possible. So hopefully we can send that out afterwards. It's just a bit of a roundup of basically everything that I was saying. That the information advice and support are a statutory service. They are a right, so every child or young person and their family has a right to access impartial information, advice and support. It gives a bit of a background to why it's a right, and sort of gives a little bit of a background about how the service has to work, which I can go over and was planning on sort of touching on a little bit in the next slide anyhow. It's a shame, I'm not sure why, I can hear it fine my end, so I'm not sure why it's doing that. But then I think even after 5 months of getting used to technology, we're still not completely there. So I will carry on and send that out afterwards instead.
Yeah, the joys of technology, Tom.
Absolutely. You'd think we'd get a handle on it by now, and you know, it's. I thought I was being clever there and getting ahead of the game by putting it on, but it's fine. So basically, the minimum standards for information advice and support services is what the video also touches on, and that will give you a bit of an overview about an information advice and support service, who they are, how they have to run, and it's quite important because the idea of them, which will hopefully be reassuring to families and to children and young people, is that they have to be impartial, very importantly, so they're funded by the local authority in which they sit. One of the reasons for the existence of the Information Advice and Support Service Network, my team, as commissioned by the Department for Education, and one of the reasons it's gone to the Council for Disabled Children as a contract rather than being held in-house is that it's really important that all the information is impartial, so that it's not sort of unduly weighted towards the professionals or the school or the local authority, or families as well. So the whole point of the service, and for the advice line, which I'll get into in a little bit, is that the information they provide is just legally based. So we provide legal training within my team to all services to be able to give out legally based information, advice and support that is just on the law. So it takes out any implications. So, you know, the local authority turned around and said, well, we just can't afford to give this child X 20 hours of support as detailed in the EHCP. The information, advice and support service can take out any budgeting needs or anything else from any other place and just say, no, legally, if it's written in the EHCP, you have a legal right to access it. If it's not being provided, then that can be challenged in various different levels of tribunal to make sure eventually that until that is put in place and actually be, you know, they have the power to hold local authority, or the tribunal will have power to hold the local authority to account, and the information, advice and support service will be able to give you that information, first of all, about what you should be receiving, how it should work, and then eventually be able to support you through the tribunal process should it get to that. So they're an impartial organisation, which is particularly important. One thing to note as well is that they are always free, and there are organisations out there that will charge for information, advice and support, and have got various different backgrounds as to why they feel they're in a position to do so. But it's important to note that all children and young people with SEN or SEND and their families have a right to free, impartial, confidential and accurate information, advice and support. So if, you know, it's there if you should want it for free, and it's your right to access that free information. And they will, like I say, they will be able to ensure you have all you need to, first of all, know what your rights are, and also to be able to challenge if you're not getting your rights. So the minimum standards is how the services themselves are held to account, and sort of make sure that this is the set of principles that make sure that the service is doing what it needs to be doing under the Children and Families Act. For instance, make sure it is impartial, make sure it is being commissioned in the right way, make sure the manager is independent of the local authority. So at first there were situations where the manager of the Semdog service was a manager in a different area in the local authority, which obviously then impacts impartiality because they may have different responsibilities with budgeting. And so it takes all of those sorts of layers out by saying you have to have a manager, a standalone manager, and a ring-fence budget, and all these sorts of safeguards to make sure that the service is a legally based, impartial information, advice and support service that's confidential and accurate as well. So just a very swift example of how a Semdog service might be involved. One of the major sort of pieces of work that Semdog has come across is around EHC needs assessment, which may be what some of the people accessing this webinar have gone through, and whether or not the request for an EHC needs assessment was sort of honoured by the local authority or not. But if a child or young person or their family wanted or felt that that child or young person wasn't able to meet their potential in school, and that they had a specific need that was a barrier to them being able to meet their potential at school, and that the support that the school was providing currently, the SEN support, wasn't enough as it was, then they may feel that they would benefit from any education, health and care plan in order to get the right support. And if the request was denied by the local authority, that would be when, and the family felt that that wasn't right, and that might be when the family contact the information, advice and support service. The caseworker would then be able to explain things like the legal tests for EHC needs assessment, which is very simple, which is whether the child or young person has or may have special educational needs, and whether they may need special educational provision to be made through an EHCP to be able to meet their potential within education. The SENDIAS worker, SENDIAS caseworker would be able to go through all of that with the family. They'd be able to give them template letters, some of which they may have themselves, some of which they may have taken from one of our partner organisations like IASSM, who I'll mention in a bit, because we have, on the one side, we have the services themselves, on the other side, we have the information organisational group, the CDC, that my team sort of sit between the two and work with both. And IASSM are one of those, and they have lots of fantastic template letters on their website. As the IS caseworker would be able to work with the family to be able to understand how to challenge based on the legal tests, and then that would go back to the LA through the appeals process. And if the LA still refused to do an EHC needs assessment, then that's when the SENDIAS service might be able to sort with taking things further, if there was an argument for doing so, including supporting to go through the tribunal process, which is sort of the legal process of taking the case to be put in front of a tribunal judge, who would then be able to make a decision about whether they need to direct the local authority to complete the EHC needs assessment or to make a decision otherwise. And so they are there just to basically go, this is what your rights are, this is what you should be entitled to, these are the assessments, these are the way to challenge, these are the template letters, and be able to then make sure that you have the ability to challenge as you go through, because as we know, the whole system is incredibly complex, and it has been unfair for many, many years. The families are expected to be experts in every single sort of field in terms of SEND law, and the services are there to try and, well, they are not even try to, they are the balance. So they help balance out that sort of understanding and knowledge by ensuring that families have information, advice and support about their rights. And so,
sorry, Tom, I was just going to say, I think that was quite timely, because we did actually have a question come in from somebody who has asked us, will SEND children without an EHCP have any rights? So I think your case study that you've just shared sort of shows, obviously, the support that they can actually get. But obviously, children, if they don't have an EHCP, they are covered under the Equalities Act 2010.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, fundamentally, the right to an education is within the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. I used to know all of those. 28, I think, off the top of my head, but I'd have to double check that. Which says that all children and young people have a right to an education. As you say, Emma, the Equalities Act, the 2010 Equalities Act, the Disability Discrimination, well, the Equalities Act then superseded the disability discrimination, says that an SEND shouldn't be a barrier to accessing that education. And so, I mean, all children and young people fundamentally have the right to an education. We know that an SEND shouldn't be a barrier to accessing education. And these are the processes to ensure that all children and young people have access to the support and services that they're entitled to, for that need to be met in order that they are able to have access to an education as they have a right to do. And so, yes, all children and young people have a right, and whether that right is met with SEN support or whether it's met with an EHCP, all comes down to the level of need that a child or young person has. And if their needs aren't being met through SEN support within school, then that's when an EHC needs assessment should be triggered, in order that an EHCP can be considered to detail the support and services that a child or young person would need to be able to access an education. And a SENDIAS service or a SENDIAS caseworker will be able to walk anyone through that. And also there are lots more information on Contact's website, on Council for Disabled Children's website, and IASSM as well, that will have lots of template letters on how best to go through those different processes.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. Thank you.
Myself and the IASSM team work with the Sendia services, as I said, nationally to provide the training, the tools, the resources that they need to be able to do their role, to challenge when necessary, to work with the local authorities and to ensure that they are funding properly, that they are working impartially when needed. The minimum standards are something that the IASSM team are in charge of as well as making sure that because services need to be impartial, then it makes things a little bit challenging in terms of being able to sort of access support. So we make sure that the services are all linked up, that they can talk to each other over the e-forum that we run, that they have regional meetings, that they all get together and discuss any challenges and successes. And we also make sure that all the work that they do is fed back to the Department for Education to ensure that they have the evidence that they need to be able to carry on funding the services and to keep them as a statutory need. So that's myself and my team's job. It's worth mentioning now formally Contact to Family. So Contact work with the IASSM as well, and they run the national helpline. So if you did want to, rather than contact your local Sendia service, you can always contact and through their helpline and give them a call, and they will also be able to, they've got trained advisors as part of their team, and they'll be able to give you information, advice and support over the phone. Sometimes it can be a bit quicker because the services themselves need to sort of open up cases and things like that, but you won't be that direct support. So it depends on the question that you might have about your child or young person's rights, or your rights if you are the child or young person, and that will influence whether you'd rather contact and just have a chat with them over the phone, or whether you'd like to contact your local Sendia service and set up a meeting and have somebody you can meet with face to face. So we work with Contact regularly, we meet with them sort of monthly, and we sort of share information and support each other to make sure that we're all providing the best support and services to children and young people. And again, I'll put all the details of how to contact since they changed the names, it will just sound strange saying contact, but on how to contact them later on in the presentation. I'll make sure the slides can be accessed as well if they would be useful. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we have the Semdog, which is the Special Educational Needs and Disability Information and Advice Group, Information Organisations Group, which is made up of DFE, IPSI, who are the Independent Parental Specialist Educational Advice Service, Contacts, SOS, SEN, the Challenging Behaviour Society, the National Autistic Society, and more. Again, apologies for the acronyms. It's one of the most frustrating things. I used to do a lot of work in participation, so sort of working with children and young people with disabilities to have their voices heard. And the one thing that always came up was how much children and young people hated acronyms, and for some reason we have hundreds of them. So I can only apologise, but yeah, that's what they're called. These are all fantastic organisations to access if you need that advice and support. Obviously, the Department for Education are the funders, so they're part of these groups. So in order that they actually hear what's happening on the frontline service, they don't actually get involved. But organisations like IPSI and Contact and the Challenging Behaviour Foundation and the National Autistic Society and all Thomas Popkins and all these organisations who are all here to support with information, advice and support as well, more sort of specifically rather than around the local sort of pan disability organisations like Sendia's. But we sort of work across the board with as many as we can, and I can provide sort of information around those as well. So I did think I'd go over some bits and pieces, although again, as mentioned, our main role is to support services, to publicise services, to make sure that they have what they needed. We've also been quite involved with the Coronavirus Act and making sure that policymakers and DFE have what they need in order to the information about what's happening on the ground in order to make some of the decisions that they're making, or contribute towards the evidence towards the decisions that they're making, which is sort of mostly us sort of just asking services what particular challenges and successes they've been having in order that the Department for Education can understand what is actually happening, And so the services themselves are more who would give that direct information, advice and support. But I thought I'd go over a little bit of the Coronavirus Act. I'm sure a lot of people may have particular questions around this. So the Coronavirus Act it did include temporary emergency powers to modify or disapply some of the legal requirements under the Children and Families Act, which is important to know as people are going back to school. However, it was only until the 31st of July that Section 42 of the Children and Families Act, which was the duty to secure special educational and healthcare provision, was modified. And during that period, it changed from an absolute duty to reasonable endeavours to discharge this duty. However, that importantly finished on the 31st of July. So local authorities now have an absolute duty to ensure that what is in the NEHCP is delivered, and that is their responsibility, and it is still a statutory responsibility. There may be some flexibilities within if it's needed locally to respond to local outbreaks. If we do carry on having localized lockdowns, they've built in just a tiny bit of flexibility, but generally speaking, the changes to Section 42 have ended, and the same rights still apply. The only thing that hasn't ended, it was some relaxation of timescales. So until the 25th of September, things like EHC needs assessments and the issuing of plans can still be done when reasonably practicable, rather than under the current timescales. And the schools should be allowed some reasonable time to reinstate things like free home to school transport, and so long as they are doing everything they can to ensure that those who need it can have it, which doesn't affect dedicated school transport, which the DfE guidance states will be exempt from some social distancing guidelines, because the right to an education currently trumps everything. And because the Coronavirus Act, it did make some changes, but since it's all been those changes have now been rescinded, have now finished, fundamentally nothing's changed in terms of, children and young people have a right to education. The law has even come out, and that legally people have to send their children and young people back to school. Children and young people have that right to an education, and children and young people have a right to everything within their EHCP, and it's the local authority's responsibility to ensure that they do. So and with the Equalities Act, children and young people have a right to not be discriminated against due to their disability. So if children and young people have challenges with social distancing or anything around that, they can't be discriminated against due to their disability. They have a legal right to access education. The local authority has a legal legal responsibility to ensure they have everything written within their EHCP. So fundamentally, nothing really should change other than timescales. And obviously, there will be conversation to be had with schools, but in terms of children and young people's rights and families' rights, it's all back to where it was this time last year, which is a strange thing to say, because nothing really feels like it's quite the same as it was this time last year. But that's legally that's where we're at.
Tom, so this we've had a question that has come in about EHCPs, and obviously today's session is more around the education element, EHCPs. But one of the questions that's come through is a child that has an EHCP presents at a general hospital. How is the health element communicated into acute care planning? Should the hospital take the EHCP into account?
Sorry, can you say that one again?
Yeah, so a child who has an EHCP presents at hospital. How is the health element communicated into acute care planning? Should the hospital take the EHCP into account?
I mean, it's that's quite a complicated one to answer now. I wouldn't want to say anything and get that wrong. I think that's a question that would be worth talking to one of the legal providers around, or the SENDIASC. I think there's a sort of a few complications within it, like the sort of the reasons sort of why you're accessing the acute care. Yeah, I think that's one I probably have to come back to, because it sounds. But I mean, by all accounts, any care provider should be taking into account all types of information about that child or young person, that in order to be able to support them properly. And you should be able to have the support from local authority or different people who are involved to be able to push that. But yeah, I wouldn't want to answer it in too much sort of. I wouldn't want to say anything that I then got wrong about that. And health. I've been mostly education and social care throughout my career, so health isn't my strongest side. But if that question can be emailed to me, we can either explore that with IPSI or similar, and be able to provide an answer with just a bit of time to consider.
Yeah, thanks Tom. I know, because obviously today's more about education than health, but it was just why we're talking about the EHCPs obviously come through. But thank you, thanks.
So in terms of sort of contacting your local service, again, I'll put all of this in more detail in the slides with links and bits and pieces, so we'll be able to go through everything there. And there's a CDC, so on the CDC website, you will be able to contact your local service. So if I quickly see if I can get that up. I can show you on the screen sharing. So if I do this, so this is the best way to be able to find where your local service is. So as you can see, all 9 regions are up here, and all you need to do is, if you were in the Northwest, you just click on the Northwest, and all the different ones here will sort of be able to just click through to the ones that you want, that is your region, that is your local service. And then once you clicked on to Manchester, it gives you address, telephone number, emails, websites, all those sorts of bits and pieces there. And so that should give you the sort of the best way to access your local service. It will also be advertised on your local offer website. So as I'm sure, as I hope, everyone's aware, everyone's sort of been told that it's been publicised properly in your local area. Every local authority has to have a local offer website, which will detail all support and services in your area and how to access them, and your SENDIA service will be on there. And there should be many other routes. So it is, as mentioned before, the local authority's responsibility to make sure everyone knows about the SENDIA service, and make sure that they have leaflets and websites and social media and those sorts of things to contact or to offer their services to children and young people. And you'd hope that professionals in the local authority were doing the same. It's not always the case, and there are sometimes SENDIA services, because a lot of their role is challenging the local authority and challenging decisions and making sure that children and young people have the ability to challenge decisions. Sometimes there can be a little bit of sort of challenges between the relationships, but generally speaking, everyone's all on the same page. And professionals should be also ensuring that you have sort of the referral routes into your service as well. So yes, CDC website has everything on there. So if you Google sort of Council for Disabled Children, find your local IAS service, you'll be able to find your local IAS service. Again, I'll put the website address out afterwards, or on your local offer website, and hopefully you would have seen a leaflet or a tweet or something as well from your local service, which will give you more information about how to contact them. And if you're not happy with your local service, you can follow their complaints procedure, you can follow the local authority's complaints procedure, and you can complain in the same ways that you would in most cases. You can also contact us. We do support services, we do raise issues with services, but because it's the local authority's responsibility ultimately to provide that service, the local authority's complaint procedure is the formal route of complaint, and to make sure that if you are unhappy with the service that you received from your SENDIAS, that's how you can challenge the service. And again, sort of more information is out there from sort of our website, which we'll get information out there afterwards, and from videos and social media, and we publish a newsletter as well. So that's how you can access information about the different or information organisational groups that are out there, and some of the ones that I mentioned earlier, again, like IASSM and Contact and those, and also access video, social media, general information that is out there from sort of around sort of the areas that we've been talking about, around making sure that you can understand and access and challenge in terms of getting the support and services that you or your child or young person is entitled to have. So that's a sort of a whistle-stop sort of tour around SENDIASs, what we do, how you can access the information, advice and support in order to be able to challenge. In terms of sort of going over children and young people's rights as well, I mean, I've touched on that briefly. I know we've got a few questions, but obviously that's such a spectrum that if you do have individual questions, we've got a few that we'll go over now, but also, as I mentioned, accessing your service and accessing these other organisations are often the best way to go.
Thanks, Tom. That was really great. It was really, really interesting. Yeah, and really obviously appreciate the time that you've spent this morning. And yeah, you're right, we've got some questions. So we had some questions that were emailed in before the session, and we've had some that have come in as well during the session. Mm-hmm. So if I go to one that's come in, so what this question is, what happens if a special school has chosen a phased return in September, so children are going in 1 week and not the next week? If the EHCP regulations have now been reinstated following the Coronavirus Act, how should schools be supporting children during the week when they are at home? What rights do the children or families now have? Should there be online learning, etc.?
Yeah, so fundamentally, if everyone now has to be back in school, and so it is the school's responsibility to make sure that they have, the children and young people have access to the full curriculum, that children and young people have access to the education that they are entitled to. A phased return, it's very specific in the DfE guidance that a phased return has to be based on the needs of the children and young people. So it can only be put in place for a temporary time, and only if they've got real reason. If there has to, if for health or for whatever reasons, it's otherwise. I mean, if they're doing a phased return where they are keeping children and young people with not based on needs, if it's not a needs-based approach, at home without sort of proper, real robust reasons as to why, then it could be classed potentially as an unlawful exclusion if you're telling people that they can't access school when the law is currently that they have to be able to access school, and that all sort of children and young people's rights, as mentioned before, hasn't changed. So it would have to be, and it would be worth if it's not been chatting to your service, chatting to your information advice support service, chatting to Contact, giving a little bit more information as to the reasons why, and that might be able to be challenged in the interim. Otherwise, what it should be at the moment is that children and young people have access to the full curriculum. So if children and young people aren't there for any reason, then they should have access to online learning, have access to worksheets, have access to all the support and services they're supposed to have had access to pre sort of summer holidays when lockdown was still in effect. And if they're not, then that's reason to challenge as well. Yeah, so I mean, phase returns, the DfE guidance, they've given a little bit of flex on that, but it really has to be needs led, and it shouldn't be for any other reason.
Thanks, Tom. And the second part to that question was, oh, sorry, the questions are flying in now. And if there's no online learning other than a homework pack, how do we get the local authority or schools to provide online support?
If online support's what's needed, then they should be providing it. And so it would be a case of challenging in the way that you would always challenge, which I know isn't really what people want to hear, because it's not always the best process, but it would be challenging through your school's complaints procedure, challenging through the local authorities complaints procedure. If you wanted a bit more weight behind that, then talking to talking to your SENDIAS, having a caseworker make the point can help, having other organisations making the point can help. But if they're not providing, I mean, it's just raising that. It can be complaining, and I mean it can be, you know, it's especially if families are wanting to go back to work and things like that, and children and young people are being held back from school when they legally should be in school, and then obviously because they legally should be in school, workplaces may be a lot less sensitive to allow children and people to be at home. So it's worth pushing, especially if it's having an impact. And most importantly, finding out why there's a phased return to school, because there should only be a phased return to school if it's needed. And the need has to be it's quite a robust need. So it would have to be something along the lines of, a child or young person would find the transition too jarring and too challenging, and would find it too overwhelming, and therefore a phased return would enable them to get used back to the school environment, and that's the only way they're going to be settling long term. If it's just a phased return for the school's reasons, if they say, well, they don't have enough staff, unless there's a real sort of, proof that there would be safeguarding or something significant, or a risk of harm, then it shouldn't be happening, and can be pushed. And if it is, and if there is a risk of harm and that can be proven, then they should be providing online and other support. And if they're not, then complaining and challenging is the best way forward.
Thanks, Tom, and I hope that's answered your question. Another question that's come through, somebody's son, they don't have an EHCP, but they have a red card to get out of class, but this has been removed and their son will be given timed breaks instead. Is the school allowed to do this?
So a red card is I mean, that sounds like a school policy in order to manage behaviour. I mean, the school, it would have to be, you'd have to look at the school policy and the behavioural plan to sort of understand the reasons behind it. And if it's time out of class and it's significant, again, that can be classed as an exclusion and an unlawful exclusion if it's sort of looked at, within isolation, if the child or young person ends up isolated or excluded within school without the proper support. And again, if the behavioural plan, any sort of behavioural plan, especially in terms of any sort of exclusions like that, has to be done in a way that is aiming to reduce the need to be using it. If the child or young person is finding that if it's not working in a way that actually enables that child or young person to access the education that they're entitled to, then that seems to suggest that there's an educational need being missed by the school, that the right support isn't being put in place. And if that is the case, then you can begin to challenge and look at an EHC needs assessment. If that child or young person if there's a barrier to accessing education, and if that's taking time of that child or young person out of class, then it is a barrier to him or her accessing their education, which then may be a need in itself to get funding for support. It would, again, it's hard to sort of answer those questions over in this sort of format, just because we'd have to look at the policy of the school and the reasons behind the card, and whether they are, whether it is a certain approach that is in order to enable that child or young person to be able to access their education, or whether it's a knee-jerk reaction that isn't particularly helpful and should be taken out in terms of not being used. So yeah, you'd have to know a little bit more. But again, there are support and services out there who can do that digging and to challenge the school if necessary.
Okay, I'm just mindful of time, so we're at 11:20, and we've got
I'll talk to you now.
questions. No, it's great, because I think, you know, you're providing everybody with so much information. It's brilliant, Tom, so thank you. Yeah, just another one that's come through, and again, I think this is another one that might be a little bit difficult for you to answer. So the local authority have said there is a blanket no to one-to-ones on EHCPs review, sorry, EHC plan review. My daughter has an EHCP but no placement.
Mm.
And she's 17, so I think obviously there's a concern about the sort of lack of one-to-one support around that.
I mean, if there's one-to-one support detailed in the EHCP, then they have to deliver it. There should be no blanket policies on needs-based approaches or outcomes, because at the end of the day, a blanket policy doesn't work, because an individual child may need something that another child doesn't need. There's no reason to have a blanket policy on one-to-ones, and it shouldn't be happening. That sounds quite unlawful. And there has to be a named placement in an EHCP. And if there isn't a named placement in an EHCP, and if there is support and services that say, well, if there were 20 hours of one-to-one in a school, then a child or young person would be able to meet this provision, and then that support isn't being provided, then the support needs to be provided, because that's what the EHCP says, and the EHCP is a legal document. And they say if either of those, if either there isn't a placement named or the support's not happening, then again that's a cause for challenge, and I would contact your SENDIA service very quickly with that one, especially if there's no placement, because see, that can be a sort of be a big challenge, and if there isn't anything named, yeah, I would contact your service.
Okay, and just to say, if there's anything, if you do need any support with that, you can obviously contact us, and we can help you get in touch with the right organisation. Okay, and then another question that's come in, and this is around social distancing. So what are the government's guidelines regarding one-to-one teaching assistant support that's specified in the EHCP in respect of social distancing?
Again, with the Equalities Act and the EHCP being a legal document, and the government saying all children and young people should be back in school. We know that there was no announcement that all children and young people should be back in school unless they can't social distance. It was all children and young people legally should have to be back in school. So, you know, schools should be doing what they can to enable social distancing. But if the child or young person, SEND especially, is such that they don't understand social distancing, or it is just something that they are unable to do because of their needs, they're not allowed to be discriminated against because of their needs. Because they're not allowed to be discriminated against because of their needs, and they should have access to the same education as someone who doesn't have an SEND, regardless of whether they understand social distancing or not. So that just the school just have to manage that. You know, that it shouldn't be a barrier to education, and that's been quite clear. You know, especially in stuff like the home to school transport, where they're saying if a child or young person needs transport to get to school, but you can't social distance on a minibus because it's not big enough, well, then you just have to not social distance. The advice that's coming out and the policies that's coming out from government seems to suggest that, and rightly, that a child's right to access education it trumps sort of the ability to social distance within reason, obviously, unless a child or young person was shielding or had a health condition or something that might reasonably cause them harm. That if they shouldn't be discriminated against because of their needs, including not understanding social distancing.
Thanks, Tom. And I think we've probably got time for one more question. So if a child's EHCP states they will receive weekly braille or touch typing or habilitation support, but the local authority have instructed their teams not to conduct visits to schools, would this be in contravention of the EHCP? I'm aware that the EHCPs are to be upheld at the commencement of the new academic year, and therefore concerned this will impede upon learning within the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, again, anything in an EHCP, it is the local authority's responsibility to ensure happens. They have to. That was the section 42 for before the summer. It was local authorities have to use their reasonable endeavours to ensure this happens. That was rescinded as of the 1st of August. If it's in an EHCP, the local authority's responsibility is to ensure that it happens. Whether that is using different agencies or however they decide to do that is up to them. They can say, well, our team aren't going to come in because of this and this reason, but then they would have to then say, but what we will do to make sure that that child or young person has what they are entitled to is we will do X, Y, Z instead. And if it's not happening, you've got many a route of appeal and challenge, kind of annual reviews, and also potentially tribunal challenges. And it's worth sort of mentioning with tribunals that if you do if it wasn't happening especially for a significant period, and it was impacting that child or young person's education, that they're challenging through tribunal can, will not only ensure that it will happen from there on out, and often if the challenge is upheld, make sure you get the apology that you're entitled to, but also occasionally sort of additional on top of that, like compensation. So it is worth it if someone isn't getting the support and services that they are legally entitled to through their EHCP in order to access education, which they are legally entitled to, then challenge is often a good way to go. And a SNDS caseworker will be able to support with the how, when and where. And also IPSI are a fantastic organisation, as well, as I mentioned them a few times, and they've got lots of information on how to challenge, and also template letters and things like that, so you can just sort of fill out the right bits and send them off to make sure that you can challenge.
Yeah, that's great, and thanks, Tom. And obviously, if anyone that's here today, you've got any questions that you want to send in that you've maybe not had time to do during the session, please obviously do drop us an email and we can get back to you. I know obviously one of the questions we're going to get back anyway, because obviously it's a little bit more in depth and related to health. But yeah, I think I would just like to obviously thank everybody for joining today, and I'm sure you'll all agree that it's been a really interesting and worthwhile session. Hopefully we've been able to answer some of your questions, if not all of your questions, through the great presentation that Tom's done. And as I say, we'll be sending the slides out later this week. And if there is anything that you want to ask us, you can obviously get in touch with us through the sort of Thomas Poppington website. So yeah, so I think, yeah, there's no more questions now. So yeah, so I think I'd like to thank everybody for joining, and hope you have a nice day. And the recording will be on the website, and we'll send the slides out soon. So yeah, thank you very much. Goodbye. Thanks, Tom.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye.